It started like any other Tuesday. People were rushing to work, kids were complaining about homework, and someone somewhere was arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Then the sky changed. Without warning, a massive ship, bigger than Manhattan, appeared right above Geneva. It didn't roar in with fire or shake the ground, it just showed up. Silent. Smooth. Like it had always been there. And the universe had finally decided to let humans see it. Within minutes, every screen on Earth lit up with the same message. Not in English, not in Mandarin or Spanish, but in a voice that somehow made sense in everyone's head, like a thought spoken out loud, calm, cold, certain. People of Earth, it said, you are hereby ordered to surrender all weapons, dissolve your governments, and place your planet under the protection of the Galactic Council. Resistance is unnecessary. Compliance is expected. The message came from something called the Galactic Concordance, a group of over 100 alien civilizations that had apparently been watching Earth for a while. According to them, humans were too emotional, too violent, too unpredictable to be allowed to keep developing on their own. They called Earth a high-risk species and said this was standard procedure for planets like ours, just like putting a leash on a dog that barks too much. Panic spread fast. Stock markets crashed. Airports shut down. Parents hugged their kids tighter. World leaders scrambled into emergency meetings, voices shaking as they debated whether to beg, bargain, or brace for invasion. But something strange happened next. Instead of falling apart, people started laughing, not nervous laughter. Not the kind you do when you're scared. Real laughter. The kind that bubbles up when something is so ridiculously over the top that it can't possibly be real. In Mumbai, a group of college students filmed themselves reacting to the alien message. One of them mimicked the deep, serious voice. Compliance is expected. Then he grinned and said, "Yeah, sure, right after I finish my chai." The video got 5 million views in 3 hours. In Sao Paulo, street artists painted a giant cartoon alien holding a clipboard like a traffic cop, with the words, "Sorry, Earth's full. Try Mars." In Nairobi, a little girl made a TikTok where she pretended to argue with the ship. "You didn't even knock. What if I was changing?" Her mom laughed so hard she cried. The more the aliens acted like stern school teachers, the more humans treated them like that one overly serious neighbor who complains about your music being too loud, even though you're just humming in the shower. Behind the scenes, things were serious, of course. Deep under the Himalayas, scientists and diplomats were working around the clock. They studied every second of the alien transmission. At first, it seemed like a straightforward threat. But one researcher noticed something odd. The message never actually said what would happen if Earth refused. No mention of weapons, no countdown, no ultimatum with teeth. It was all bark. The Galactic Council relied on fear, on the idea that any species smart enough to build cities and rockets would also be smart enough to know when they were outmatched, and just give up. But they didn't understand humans. Humans had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and the invention of reality TV. They'd climbed out of caves, sailed across oceans with nothing but stars to guide them, and put a man on the moon using computers less powerful than a modern toaster. Giving up wasn't in their DNA, not when they still had a chance, not when they still had each other. And so, while world leaders debated strategy, ordinary people did what they'd always done in hard times. They made jokes, shared food, checked on their neighbors, and reminded each other that no one, not even aliens, gets to decide who they are. The UN called an emergency global summit. Every nation, big or small, sent representatives. For once, there were no secret agendas, no hidden deals. Just one question: what do we do? Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to prepare for war. But the quietest voice in the room, the one from a small island nation that had survived rising seas and hurricanes, said something that stuck. They think we'll be afraid, so let's show them what we do when we're not. That became the turning point. Instead of sending a formal reply full of legal jargon or military threats, Earth's leaders agreed on something simpler, something very human. They would respond with a laugh, not to mock, not to provoke, but to say clearly and calmly, "We hear you. We see you. And we're not scared." The first official message Earth sent back to the Galactic Council wasn't a declaration or a demand. It was a 30-second video clip. It showed a kid in a backyard somewhere in Southeast Asia, wearing mismatched socks and holding a popsicle. The alien ship loomed in the sky behind him. He looked up, squinted, then stuck out his tongue and blew a loud, wet raspberry. The screen faded to black with 3 words in plain white text. Make us. The video spread faster than any alien signal ever could. Within hours, it was being shared on every continent, translated into hundreds of languages, remixed into songs, turned into memes, stitched onto t-shirts. The Galactic Council went silent. They hadn't expected this. Their entire system was built on control through intimidation. They dealt with species that begged, species that fought, species that hid, but never one that looked a galaxy-spanning empire in the eye and giggled. Back on Earth, life didn't stop. Schools reopened. Trains ran on time. Farmers planted crops. Musicians played. People fell in love. And every night when the giant ship hung in the sky like a silent judge, someone, somewhere, would look up and whisper or shout something silly just to remind themselves, we're still here. And we're still us. That was the real answer to the ultimatum. Not weapons, not treaties. Just the stubborn, joyful, messy truth of being human. The aliens had come expecting to find a planet of primitives ready to kneel. Instead, they found a planet that couldn't stop laughing, even in the face of the unknown, and that more than any weapon or shield, made them pause. Because you can threaten a species that fears you, but what do you do when they just chuckle? The Galactic Council didn't know what to do with Earth's reply. Back in their gleaming halls near Proxima Centauri, the alien diplomats sat in stunned silence as the 30-second video played on loop. A child, a raspberry. 3 words, make us. To them it made no sense. In their records, every species faced with galactic authority had responded in predictable ways: fear, obedience, or desperate bargaining. None had ever answered a surrender demand with silliness. Their analysts ran simulations. Their linguists dissected every frame. Their historians scoured data from thousands of conquered or guided worlds. Nothing matched this. Meanwhile, on Earth, people weren't waiting for permission to be themselves. Instead of hiding or panicking, they doubled down on being human. Artists painted murals of aliens tripping over banana peels. Comedians wrote routines about intergalactic parking tickets. Musicians uploaded songs with titles like My Spaceship's in the Shop Again. One viral clip showed a dog barking at the sky while wearing a tiny astronaut helmet made from a colander. It got more views than the Council's original warning. The aliens watched it all unfold through their deep space monitors, baffled. Why weren't humans acting like a species on the brink of subjugation? Why were they making jokes instead of building bunkers? What the Council didn't understand was that laughter wasn't denial, it was defiance. For centuries, humans had used humor to face the impossible. During wars, they cracked jokes in trenches. During plagues, they sang songs through closed windows. When the world felt too heavy, they lightened it with a punchline. It wasn't weakness. It was armor. And now that armor was shining brighter than ever. The Council tried to regain control. They sent a second message, more formal, more stern. Your response is noted. Non-compliance will result in consequences. But Earth didn't flinch. This time, the reply came from a small town in the Andes. A group of elders, some over 100 years old, sat in a circle on a sunlit hill. They held hands, looked straight into a camera, and began to laugh, not loudly but deeply, like they'd just remembered a shared secret. The sound was warm, rich, full of life, no words, just laughter. The video spread like wildfire. People called it the laugh of the grandmothers. Strangers played it in subway stations, cafes, even during school assemblies. Soldiers on border posts listened to it before their shifts. It became a quiet anthem of resistance. Back at the Concordance headquarters, tension grew. Younger members of the Council, species who'd once been guided themselves, started asking uncomfortable questions. Why are we treating them like a threat? One asked. They haven't fired a single weapon. They're just being. Older delegates dismissed the concern. It's a trick, they insisted. Emotional manipulation. They're trying to confuse us, but doubt had taken root. On Earth, governments weren't just relying on memes and music. Behind closed doors, every nation, rich or poor, large or small, began sharing everything. Not just military plans, but power grids, medical research, food distribution networks. For the first time in history, borders didn't matter as much as survival. They called it Project Janus, not after a god, But after the idea of looking two ways at once, outward to the stars and inward to each other, the goal wasn't to build a superweapon. It was to show the galaxy what humanity could do when it worked as one. And they had a deadline, 72 hours. In that time, something extraordinary happened. Every satellite orbiting Earth, old weather monitors, retired spy birds, even defunct space junk, was gently nudged into position by teams of engineers working in shifts across continents. No explosions, no drama, just careful, precise movements, like dancers rehearsing a routine. On the ground, power stations from Norway to New Zealand synchronized their output, not to create a surge, but a steady, rhythmic hum, low enough to travel through the planet's crust, strong enough to be picked up by deep space sensors. Scientists called it the heartbeat of Earth. And in observatories from Chile to Japan, astronomers aimed their biggest telescopes not at distant galaxies, but at the Concordance's home systems. They didn't send threats. They sent Beethoven's Ninth Symphony encoded in light pulses. They sent Van Gogh's Starry Night painted in radio waves. They sent Maya Angelou's voice reading poetry, translated into mathematical patterns that any intelligent mind could decode. It wasn't a show of force. It was a show of soul. The message was clear. You think we're dangerous because we fight, but we're powerful because we create. You see chaos. We see connection. When the 72 hours ended, the entire planet held its breath. Then, from orbit, the satellites aligned perfectly. Sunlight bounced off their surfaces in a slow, swirling pattern, a helix of light stretching thousands of miles across the sky. From space, it looked like Earth was breathing. The Concordance ships hovering nearby recorded it all. Their sensors picked up the harmonic hum vibrating through the planet, their data cores filled with human art, music and stories. For the first time, the Council didn't see a threat. They saw a civilization that had turned its pain into beauty, its fear into song, its differences into strength. One young analyst, a being from a world that had lost its culture under Concordance, guidance, and watched a clip of children in a refugee camp dancing under the alien ship's shadow. They weren't crying. They were laughing, spinning, holding hands. She turned to her superior and whispered, "They didn't just laugh at us. They invited us to remember what we've forgotten." Back on Earth, no one celebrated yet. They knew the real test was coming. The Council still had armies, still had weapons, still held the power to crush a planet if they chose to. But something had shifted. The arrogance in their messages had softened. Their tone wasn't so certain anymore, because now they faced a species that didn't just resist with guns, but with joy. And joy, it turned out, was harder to conquer than any fortress. People went to bed that night not knowing what tomorrow would bring. But they slept a little easier, not because the danger was gone, but because they'd remembered who they were, not just survivors, creators, laughers, and, above all, stubbornly, beautifully human. The galaxy had demanded surrender. Humanity had replied with a wink, a song, and a satellite ballet. And somewhere, deep in the halls of the Galactic Council, a single thought began to spread, quietly, like a rumor. What if we've been wrong about them all along? The silence from the Galactic Council lasted 3 days. Not the kind of silence that means peace, but the heavy, uneasy kind that comes right before a storm. On Earth, people felt it in their bones. The giant ship still hung in the sky, unmoving, unreadable. No new messages, no threats, just waiting. But humans weren't waiting back. While the world watched the skies, something quiet and powerful was happening underground, in labs, in garages, in community centers, even in school classrooms. People weren't building bombs or shields. They were building something far more dangerous to the Council's control. Proof that humanity didn't need to be managed. It started with a simple idea. If the aliens thought humans were too chaotic to be trusted with their own future, then humanity would show them what real order looked like. Not the cold, rigid kind the Council loved, but the kind that grows from trust, shared purpose, and a little bit of stubborn hope. In the deserts of Chile, engineers worked through the night, linking solar farms across 3 countries into one seamless grid. In the Arctic, researchers shared decades of climate data with nations they'd once argued with over fishing rights. In cities from Lagos to Seoul, volunteers used 3D printers to make parts for water purifiers, then shipped them to villages that had never seen clean running water. No one was in charge. No one gave orders, it just happened. Because when the whole planet feels like it's on the line, small grudges start to feel small. Then came the call from the moon. Not a dramatic announcement, just a calm voice over a live feed from the Tycho Crater Research Base. "We're ready," it said, and with that, Project Janus entered its final phase. Over the next 72 hours, Earth didn't speak with one voice. It spoke with millions, and somehow they all sang the same song. First, the satellites. Hundreds of them, old and new, military and civilian from every nation that had ever reached for the stars, gently shifted in orbit. Not to aim weapons, but to catch sunlight. At dawn over the Pacific, they aligned just right. And for a few perfect minutes, a spiral of golden light stretched across the sky, visible even in daylight. From deep space, it looked like Earth was glowing from within. People on the ground stopped in their tracks. Kids pointed. Elders smiled. Someone in Jakarta filmed their grandmother crying, not from fear, but from wonder. "We made that," she whispered. "All of us." Then came the sound. At exactly noon Greenwich time, every power station on the planet pulsed in unison. Not a surge, just a soft, steady hum like a giant tuning fork struck deep in the Earth's core. It wasn't loud enough to hear with human ears, but it traveled through rock, ocean, and air all the way into space. Scientists called it the planetary chord. Alien sensors picked it up instantly. To them, it sounded like a heartbeat. But the real surprise came next. From every major telescope on Earth, a stream of data shot into the void. Not in military code, but in beauty. Beethoven's Ode to Joy translated into light pulses, a recording of rain falling on a forest canopy, encoded in gravitational waves, a child's drawing of the alien ship, with a smiley face added, sent as a neutrino burst toward the Council's homeworld. It wasn't a message of war. It was a message of invitation. This is who we are. Not perfect, not peaceful all the time, but trying, always trying. The Council watched it all unfold with growing unease. Their models had predicted panic, division, collapse. Instead, they saw cooperation on a scale their own history had never achieved. Their species had united only through conquest. Humans were uniting through choice, and that scared them more than any weapon ever could. Back on Earth, no one was celebrating yet. They knew the real test was coming. The Council still had fleets, still had the power to erase cities with a thought, but something had changed in the way people carried themselves. A fisherman in Vietnam looked up at the alien ship and said to his grandson, "They think we're wild animals. Let's show them we're gardeners." In a refugee camp in Jordan, teenagers used spare parts to build a radio that could pick up signals from the moon. When they heard the first notes of a lullaby beamed from Tycho Crater, they danced in the dust. Even in places where war had raged for years, ceasefires held, not because of treaties, but because people suddenly remembered they were on the same team. Then, the Council made their move. 3 massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, jumped out of hyperspace and took position around Earth. Their hulls shimmered with energy. Weapons charged. The message was clear. Enough games. People held their breath. But Earth didn't flinch. Instead, every piece of human-made junk in orbit, dead satellites, old rocket stages, even a lost astronaut glove from the 1970s, had been quietly moved over the past week. Not randomly, with purpose. And now, from the dreadnought's view, it all came together. The debris formed a single, unmistakable shape against the blackness of space. A giant middle finger. Not aggressive. Not violent, just cheeky, the kind of thing a kid might draw on a bathroom wall to say, "You don't scare me." For a long moment, the alien ships just hovered there. Then one by one, their weapon systems powered down. No shots were fired. No threats were made. Because in that moment, the Council realized something terrifying. Humanity wasn't bluffing. They weren't begging. They were daring them. And worse, they were having fun doing it. Inside the lead dreadnought, a young officer from a once subjugated species watched the orbital prank on his screen. He'd grown up hearing stories of how his people had been civilized by the Council, how their songs were banned, their history erased, their laughter called disorderly. Now, here was a species that refused to be silenced. That turned fear into art, pressure into play. He turned to his commander and said quietly, If we attack them, we don't just destroy a planet. We destroy the last place in the galaxy that still remembers how to laugh without permission. The commander didn't answer, but he didn't order the attack either. Down on Earth, people didn't know what was happening in those alien war rooms, but they felt the shift. The air felt lighter. The ship in the sky seemed less like a judge and more like a guest who wasn't sure if they were welcome. That night, someone in Reykjavik started playing piano on a rooftop. Someone in Mumbai joined in on a flute. Soon music rose from cities and villages alike, not coordinated, not planned, just human, and high above. The orbital middle finger stayed in place, glowing softly in the sunlight. Not a threat, just a reminder. We're still here, still us, and we're not going anywhere. The council had come expecting to find a species that needed to be controlled. Instead, they found one that couldn't be, and that changed everything. The three dreadnoughts stayed in orbit, silent and still, like giant predators that had lost their appetite. Inside the Galactic Council's central chamber near Proxima Centauri, chaos had replaced order. What was supposed to be a routine planetary quarantine had turned into the biggest crisis in centuries. Delegates from dozens of species argued in hushed, urgent tones. Some demanded immediate military action. Others warned that attacking Earth would shatter the Council's image, and maybe the entire alliance, because something unexpected had happened. Earth's defiance had sparked whispers across the galaxy. On worlds that had long accepted the Council's rule without question, people began asking, why? Why did Earth get punished for being loud, creative, and messy, while obedient planets stayed quiet and small? Why was laughter seen as a threat? In the lower districts of the Concordance capital, young beings from species once labeled high risk gathered in hidden corners, sharing Earth's videos like forbidden treasures. A clip of kids building a cardboard spaceship in a Nairobi slum went viral on underground networks. A recording of elders singing under the alien ship became a lullaby for rebels on a dozen worlds. The Council had always justified its control by saying it kept the galaxy safe from chaos. But now people were starting to wonder, what if the real danger wasn't chaos but silence? Back on Earth, life went on, but with a new kind of quiet confidence. People weren't celebrating victory. They knew the threat wasn't gone, but they walked taller. They looked up at the sky not with fear, but curiosity. In classrooms, teachers used the crisis to talk about unity, history, and what it means to stand together without losing who you are. In factories, workers repurposed old defense systems into solar farms and water purifiers, saying, if they think we're dangerous, let's be dangerous in the best way by helping each other. Then came the leak. No one knew how it happened. Maybe a disillusioned analyst, maybe a hacked data core, but a file spread across the galaxy like wildfire. It showed internal council reports labeling Earth not as a security risk, but as an economic one. Humanity's breakthroughs in clean fusion, neural interfaces, and quantum communication were advancing faster than the Council's own tech, and threatening the delicate balance of power. The high-risk label wasn't about violence. It was about control, about keeping Earth small so the Council could stay on top. The truth hit like a thunderclap. Species that had trusted the Council for generations felt betrayed. Protests erupted on trade hubs and colony worlds. Graffiti appeared on official buildings. Earth laughs. We remember. Why fear joy? Let them grow. Even some Council enforcers began to question their orders. One ship captain, whose people had been guided into forgetting their own language, refused to arm his weapons when ordered to prepare for orbital strikes. I won't erase a world that still sings in its own voice, he told his superiors. The cracks were spreading, and Earth noticed. Instead of gloating, humanity did something even more disarming. They reached out, not with demands, not with threats, but with open hands. From the moon base, a new broadcast went out, not just to the Council, but to every listening world. It showed farmers sharing seeds, doctors teaching remote surgery via hologram, kids from rival nations playing soccer together in a field under the shadow of the dreadnoughts. The message was simple. We're not perfect, but we're trying, and you're welcome to try with us. No propaganda, no lies, just real life, messy, hopeful, and alive. That night, something small but powerful happened. One of the dreadnoughts, the smallest of the three, sent a private, unencrypted signal. Not to governments, not to militaries, to a public Earth server. It was a single image, a star map with one system circled. Beneath it, in rough translated human script, "My home." They took our songs. Thank you for reminding us we still have voices. No signature, no return address. But everyone knew what it meant. The council wasn't a monolith. It was made of beings, some tired, some scared, some longing for something they'd lost. And Earth's laughter had woken something in them. On the ground, people didn't treat the message like a victory. They treated it like a gift. Within hours, musicians from every continent recorded a new piece, a blend of human instruments and synthesized tones designed to mimic the sounds of that distant world's lost songs. They beamed it into space with a note. "We'll keep singing until you can join us." The next morning, the lead dreadnought shifted position not to attack, but to face the sun. Its massive hull caught the light and reflected it down to Earth in a slow, sweeping arc like a bow. It wasn't surrender, but it wasn't hostility either. It was respect. In Geneva, world leaders met again, not in panic, but in calm. They agreed on one thing. Whatever came next, Earth wouldn't beg for a seat at the galactic table. They'd build their own, and they'd leave a chair open for anyone brave enough to sit down and talk as equals. Meanwhile, in a quiet village in the Andes, an old woman watched the alien ship through her window. She'd lived through droughts, wars, and the slow creep of time. She'd seen her people silenced, then rise again. She smiled, poured herself a cup of tea, and said to no one in particular, "They thought we'd kneel, but we've been standing since we learned to walk." High above, the three dreadnoughts remained, but their weapons stayed cold. Their silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of questions, and somewhere in the galaxy, 1,000 more questions were being asked for the first time in generations. The council had come to enforce order. Instead, they'd accidentally lit a spark, and sparks, as humans knew better than anyone, have a funny way of starting fires that can't be put out. The day the Galactic Council changed its mind, it didn't happen with fanfare or explosions. It happened quietly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. A single message arrived, not broadcast to the world, but sent directly to every nation's capital, every major city, every village with a working receiver. No stern voice, no cold warnings, just plain words translated into every human language. The demand for Earth's capitulation is withdrawn. Provisional membership in the Galactic Concordance is offered, pending mutual agreement. People read it, then read it again. Some laughed. Some cried. Most just stood still for a moment, looking up at the sky like they were waiting for the punchline. But there was no trick, no hidden clause. The Council had blinked, not because Earth had weapons, not because they'd won a battle, but because they'd refused to play the game the way the galaxy expected. They hadn't bowed. They hadn't broken. They'd just kept being human, and that somehow had been enough. The world didn't erupt in wild celebration. There were no parades, no fireworks. Instead, something deeper happened. People gathered in parks, in town squares, in online spaces, and simply talked about what came next, about what kind of future they wanted, not just for Earth, but for everyone watching from the stars. Because humanity had learned something during those tense weeks. They weren't alone in wanting freedom. The messages from other worlds, the quiet thanks, the shared songs, the secret acts of solidarity, had shown them that the galaxy was full of voices waiting to be heard. So when the Council offered a seat at their table, Earth didn't rush to accept. Instead, they called a global assembly, not just of leaders, but of teachers, farmers, artists, engineers, kids, elders. Anyone who wanted to speak could. And what they said over and over was the same. We don't want to join a system that silences others. We want to help build one that listens. The reply to the Council wasn't a treaty. It was a live broadcast from the moon. No generals, no politicians in suits, just a scientist in a worn-out jacket, standing in front of a window with Earth rising in the background. She smiled. Not smug, not angry, just calm. "We appreciate the offer," she said, "but we don't need your counsel. What we'd like is your respect. And maybe your coffee. Ours still tastes like burnt socks," the galaxy laughed. Not at her. With her. Because for the first time in centuries, someone had spoken to the Concordance not as a subject, but as an equal. And they'd done it with kindness, humor, and zero fear. Within weeks, something new began to take shape, not a replacement for the Council, but a companion to it. A loose network of worlds, species, and communities that believed cooperation didn't mean control. They called it the Free Systems Accord. Earth didn't lead it. They just helped start the conversation. And the first rule? No one speaks for anyone else. Everyone gets to tell their own story. Back on Earth, life slowly returned to something like normal, but not the old normal. The crisis had changed people. Borders still existed, but they mattered less. When a flood hit one country, help came from everywhere, no questions asked. When a new clean energy breakthrough happened in one lab, the plans were shared freely across the planet. Kids grew up learning not just their own history, but stories from 100 other worlds, tales of lost songs, silent rebellions, and the courage to laugh when the universe says you shouldn't. The alien ships didn't leave right away. One stayed in orbit for months, not as a guard, but as a guest. Its crew exchanged music, recipes, even gardening tips with people on the ground. They learned how to make dumplings. Humans learned how to grow blue moss that glowed in the dark. It wasn't perfect. Misunderstandings happened. Old fears didn't vanish overnight. But every time tension rose, someone would remember the raspberry video, or the orbital middle finger, or the grandmother's laughter, and they'd choose patience over panic. A year after the ultimatum, the first official Free System Summit was held, not on Earth, not on a concordance world, but on a neutral station orbiting a quiet star. Delegates arrived in all shapes and sizes. Some walked, some floated, some communicated through light or scent, but they all came with one thing in common. They were tired of being told how to live. Earth's delegation didn't bring demands. They brought gifts. Seeds that could grow in harsh soil, open-source medical tech, a recording of children from every continent saying hello in their own languages. And at the end of the summit, when the new charter was signed, the first line read, "All voices matter, especially the ones that laugh in the dark." Years later, when historians looked back, they wouldn't call it a war or a victory. They'd call it the Great Chuckle, the moment humanity chose joy over fear and changed the galaxy by refusing to be afraid. On Earth, things kept moving. Cities grew greener. Oceans healed. People still argued about pineapple on pizza, but now when they looked up at the stars, they didn't see judges or invaders. They saw neighbors, and sometimes on clear nights you could still see the faint outline of that old orbital formation, the one made of junk and defiance. It had long since drifted apart, but people swore they could still feel it there, like a ghost of courage. In Geneva, an old man sat on a balcony, sipping terrible coffee and watching alien ships dock peacefully at the new spaceport. He'd lived through the whole thing, the fear, the laughter, the quiet revolution. He didn't say much, just smiled, shook his head, and whispered to the wind, "Told you they'd fold." Because in the end, the galaxy hadn't been conquered by weapons or words. It had been won by something far simpler, by a species that, when told to kneel, chose to chuckle instead. And in that chuckle was everything: hope, stubbornness, creativity, and the unshakable belief that no one, not even the stars, gets to decide who you are.